Okay, up next, we have Crystal B. Lake. Crystal is an associate professor in the English department at Wright State University. She earned her PhD in 2008, and before moving to Dayton in 2011, she was a postdoctoral fellow at Georgia Institute of Technology. Look at the big brains on Crystal. Crystal teaches courses and conducts research on British literature, history, and culture. Please welcome Crystal B. Lake.
Can you see me? Okay. Thank you. So hi. Crystal Lake is my real name, and I'm an 18th centuryist. Well, wait. That's where all my cocktail party small talk goes to die too. So let me try again. Crystal Lake is still my real name, and I'm an English professor, but not the kind who cares about your grammar. I do, however, care about your books, the classy ones and the trashy ones. I especially care about books written roughly between Shakespeare and Jane Austen. And like all professors, I lead a secret, thrilling second life outside of the classroom and the dark, cold basements of libraries where I dig for books. I think that this digging for books is especially important for books written in the 1700s because they're disappearing quickly, and yet they bear witness to the beginnings of almost everything that defines our culture today. Democracy, industry, empire, cities, indoor plumbing. I think lately, however, I've been interested in finding and saving more than just books. Recently, scientists as well as philosophers have been asking us to think differently about the physical objects that surround us, like this tent, or that seat you're sitting on, or that beverage and cheeky pie calling your name, or that so-called smartphone in your pocket. We're used to thinking about these objects as things that we make, and that we use, and that we control. And we certainly don't imagine them as alive. We know that they don't move or talk or think like us, or at least we think that we know that. But recently, researchers in fields like quantum physics, molecular biology, and neuroscience are starting to find out that objects are up to a lot more than we can see. And it doesn't take a PhD in rocket science to realize that your iPhone, at least, is doing a lot of things with and without you, for you, and instead of you. This realization, however, is not so new as it might seem. In the 1700s, there were many people, scientists and philosophers, as well as writers and artists, who thought that the objects around us, even a pinhead, or the period at the end of a sentence, or the edge of a razor, might be living a secret life all of their own. That a period at the end of a sentence would be something you would inspect under a microscope in the first place offers one example, albeit a very small example, of how people thought of books as living objects in the 1700s when a long revolution in print was underway. Literacy rates soared. A whole industry sprung up around books. The public went wild for books, and writers invented new kinds of stories with characters and settings and plots that seemed more alive and real than ever before. Because of 18th century writers, we now take that novel you can't put down for granted. And in the 1700s, they thought that the technology of books was astounding. And I think that they were right. Books are still the best virtual reality we've ever invented. How else to explain that sense we have when we're reading a good book that its make-believe characters are really real people? Or how our imaginations can see a book's entire world with stunning detail, and yet everyone sees it differently. We're used to thinking that reading happens up here and inside, but what does reading look like if we think of books as teeming with secret lives all of their own? And what does reading look like if we think about books as collaborators with whom we can build things that aren't just imaginary, but also a little bit real? So my current research is trying to do just that. So I've been digging in the basements of libraries and museums, not only for books, but also for three-dimensional objects that the first books inspired their readers to make. And I think that these objects might be evidence that there's something really unique about how books work. rather than see books then as just words on a page that speak to our imaginations, I want to know if it's possible to understand books as objects that inspire or even compel us to build, to create, and to make new things, to refashion our physical world based on the plots, characters, and settings that live inside of books. And as it turns out, there is a lot of evidence in these archives that the first books moved not only their readers' hearts and minds, but also their hands. And this is one of them, of an early reader who made a three-dimensional design to represent a story about the mouse that was trapped in her house. And here's another example of how eager readers were to transform their experiences of poems into elaborate productions. So Lord Byron's long poem Don Juan was staged in the 1800s with astonishing technological sophistication, a grand banquet, a cavern, and a shower of fire in which Don Juan was destroyed. Early readers brought authors, stories, and characters into their everyday lives. Their fans fluttered with quotes and literary riddles. They created paper dolls. They sat around the evenings playing board games revolving around books. And they invented moving pictures of their favorite novels. Lots of readers even use books to try and predict the future. Here's one of several examples I found of an early reader who wrote down all of the important quotes from all of her favorite books and then used a combination of numbers based on dates and astrology to tell the fortunes of her family and her friends. All of this suggests to me that there is a history of reading as making out there waiting to be rediscovered and preserved. Many of these objects are fragile and they're quickly disintegrating, but I think that they offer important prototypes from the past that can still tell us a lot about who we are and how we create. I've also been trying to bring back books' artisanal entrepreneurial spirit by inviting my students to make things inspired by the books they read, to look inside of books to find new ideas for objects or designs that respond to and might even help solve big problems like climate change. So I believe, in other words, that books in their way want to be our collaborators, and that if we would think about books a little differently, as living objects, as miniature worlds, and as prototypes, then we would suddenly see their influence all around us. So go out and read a good book, and while you're at it, make something with it.